At the recent 2016 AVMA convention, I encountered a company offering a unique educational opportunity. Specifically, they had the first ever RACE-approved 2-week veterinary course on wildlife management in South Africa, planned for the end of August. Once I learned of this fantastic opportunity, I could not pass it up. I have just returned from this expedition and must say that it was the best trip ever. I learned so much, and I am excited that Professor Van Hoven has agreed to partner with VetVine to offer an educational series that highlights some of the things that I learned while in South Africa. Dr. Berger and I are here with Professor Wouter Van Hoven, Emeritus Professor at the University of Pretoria and founder of EcoLife Expeditions. I am so excited that Professor Van Hoven has agreed to join us in this space. Professor?
Thank you, Dr. Zinger. It's been a pleasure having you out there in South Africa with the rest of the group, as you can see there. So we are now starting it's the part 2 of a series concerning wildlife conservation and care in Southern Africa. And in this installment, we'd like to put the focus more on the dilemma with rhino conservation. It has become a very debated issue. It has been very controversial, but it's been also very sad history in the past couple of years on this dilemma. And I'd like to put this whole thing in perspective, and then you can also come up maybe with ideas of how we should go about it. I firstly want you to have a look at this particular slide. Now, this is the red deer. And this red deer, this picture was taken in New Zealand, on the South Island of New Zealand. Now, bear in mind, New Zealand is a country that historically didn't have any mammals on it, except the occasional bats in the south. But historically, there was never mammals. And all mammals have been introduced to this country, including the red deer. Now, these red deer was originally brought to New Zealand for the purpose of hunting and venison. But over the years, the farmers in South Island of New Zealand farmed with these deer in order to harvest the velvet off the antlers. And this became a very profitable business. And today, there is 1.1 million deer on intensive deer farms, and they are herded like cattle, they tame, and these animals are then annually harvested, all the velvet off their antlers. And this velvet is then used and dried and marketed. On the markets, the velvet goes to China, Korea, and to Vietnam, and they make extracts of the velvet, and it's used mostly to make an aphrodisiac, pills for male vigor. So it's also supposed to use for some other things, but most of it seems to be sold for this particular purpose. Makes one wonder, how did the human race come to where we are without having to use all these things? Another example of where an animal was kept alive, like the red deer, and harvested a product that led to the expansion and protection of the species is the vicuña. Now, the vicuña is a beautiful llama-like animal that occurs in South America, particularly in Peru, in Chile, and in Bolivia, and in the higher areas in the Andes. Now, the vicuña has got a very specific hair. The hair is very fine. On average, the diameter of the hair of the vicuña is about 12 microns. This makes it an extremely sought-after hair to be woven into coats. So this animal has been poached and illegally hunted in those areas in South America in the first half of the previous century to such a level that they became almost extinct. There was less than 100 of them left by 1960. And then the change occurred because most of the hair that was then shaved off the animals that were shot. So the animals get shot, the skin is taken off, and all the hair is cut off, and that was then packaged and marketed and sold in particularly Italy And that's where they made these garments. Then by about 1960, there was almost nothing left. And it was with Italian intervention that they came to these areas and said, you guys should prevent these animals being killed for the hair, and you should rather keep them in bigger pens, and like sheep, get them into a crush annually and simply shave the hair off and market it without killing the animal. And then next year you can have that very same animal and once again shave the hair off and sell it at a good price. So this happened, and there was a dramatic increase in the number of those species. Here you can see what the kind of money is that's made out of this product. A sport coat's going to cost you about $21,000. A made-to-measure suit is going to cost you $40,000. So it is not in every man's budget to just buy a Vigunia coat or a Vigunia suit. But the important thing is the pressure on the species of going towards extinction has been changed around. Since, if you look at this graph, since 1964, there's been a dramatic increase from about 100 animals to today, where there's over 500,000 of them around, and many of them are being kept in areas where they can be utilized and shaved. So a fantastic situation of a win-win-win situation where the animal was saved from the brink of extinction, it satisfied a market demand, and it also alleviated poverty. Because in many of these areas in the Andes, those people don't have much, and now they have a sustainable income by just using this. And I've used these two comparisons to show that this should also be done with rhinoceros. At this point in time, the rhino horn on the black market sells for about $90,000 for 1 kilogram. And that is an enormous price. And if we compare that with the red deer of New Zealand, which fetches $160 for a kilogram, it's a legal activity. The animal stays alive and there's no poaching. With the Vigunia, the price of the hair is about $800 for a kilogram. Once again, it's a legal practice. The animal stays alive and there's minimal poaching. But if we look at the rhinos, the rhino horn sells for, on the black market, for $90,000 for a kilogram, but it's an illegal practice to trade in the horn. And therefore, nobody bothers to protect them really in terms of a sustainable use option. And the only way you can get hold of a rhino horn is to kill the animal. So poaching and the illegal network of criminals is where you get rhino horn. And that's why the price is so high. One could probably compare this with bootlegging when you had the prohibition on alcohol. The prices was very high, and the only way you could get alcohol was from illegal people, and there was a lot of illegal activities going on until such time that it was regulated and legalized. And we are now in the stage with the rhino horn that it is illegal. Every animal is getting killed, and the only way to get it is through criminals. But the rhino can be handled the same as the Vigunia and the red deer. That horn grows. That horn is like your fingernail. It grows on an average of 1 to 1.5 kilograms per annum. There's no need to kill the rhino to get the horn. Our problem in South Africa is that, and that's a worldwide problem, is that 94% of all the rhinos in the world is presently within South Africa. And of this 94%, 40% of that is on the private game reserves. And this places an enormous responsibility on us to save and protect the species. Well, we're struggling. We're not exactly there. We are losing them still at this point of vastly more than 1,000 per annum. The ironic thing then is that the private sector guys, they are very reluctant nowadays to have a rhino on his ranch. And the prices on an auction for rhino is very low. It's about $20,000 on average for a live rhino. Because if you would buy on an auction a rhino and you put it on your ranch, with that comes the responsibility of looking after the animal. Because you're going to need to just about hire a little private army to protect that animal. and that's costing money. Furthermore, having it on your ranch, you are simply inviting criminals with guns and machetes to come on your land. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you might be in a problem yourself. So it is a great responsibility, and therefore the price of live rhino is very low. However, a dead rhino is much more valuable because now the horn is hacked off by the criminals, and a full horn can reach $400,000 to $500,000 for the whole horn. So the dead animal is in fact more valuable than the live. There's been a lot of publicity around rhinos and the whole dilemma of the poaching. It's been on Time magazine, it's been in newspapers, it's many people in the U.S. that I meet here is aware of the dilemma of the potential extinction of the species. This has become a very famous specimen of a rhino, a white rhino. It got the name Hope, and it was in the Eastern Cape on a reserve. This animal was wounded and then survived, and thanks to the intervention of two foremost veterinarians, they saved this animal from that state where it is now in being alive. I mean, the whole face is hacked off. You can see the tongue of the animal there. So they treated this animal, and today it's still alive. It was a very grisly find to find an animal walking around with a face like that. So Dr. Gerard Steenkamp and Dr. John Marais, they were the two senior veterinarians from the veterinary school at the University of Pretoria that did these operations and actually turned this animal around from the brink of death. So the poaching is a horrible thing. Animals are being shot. Kruger Park loses many, and the private ranches are losing a lot of them as well. And what I see as being the solution eventually will be to ranch with rhino, like the folks in South America started to ranch with the Vegunia, and like the folks in New Zealand started to ranch with red deer, because all three of these animals produce a substance that is renewable and that can be utilized without any negative effect on the species whatsoever. But it's illegal, and we need to change that. It is illegal because CITES has put a ban on any form of trade of this commodity. And they did that believing that they're doing the right thing and that this is going to save the species from possible extinction because of the poaching. Well, it did just the opposite. The ban on the trade of the horn has given the sole right of trade in horn to criminals, and because of the high price of this product, there's simply more and more of them coming into the country. At any given time, there's 15 groups of poachers wandering in the bushes of Kruger National Park trying to kill rhinos. And it just isn't so easy to find them and eliminate them. We're losing rhinos big time. And on the private ranches, this memorial stone is for a rhino which had the nickname of Patrol. This was on a private ranch. These animals become tame. They become like people's pets. And to then just get up one morning and find the animal dead and its whole face hacked off is extremely traumatic and emotional to the owners of these animals. But this is what is really concerning us. Ever since the beginning of the 1900s, there's been occasionally a rhino that has been poached and the horn hacked off. The whole trade was at a very low level. And the black rhino horns were sent mostly to Yemen, where they made dagger handles of them. But the white rhino horns went mostly to China and Vietnam, where they were used as a medicinal agent, were used in medical and historical medicinal stuff, and also to a lesser extent as an aphrodisiac. So we lost, if you just look at the graph from 1990 onwards, we lose 20, 30, maybe 40 per annum, and it wasn't much concern. But then suddenly, 8 years ago, we saw a spike in these numbers, and you can see that graph. we just saw every year more and more rhinos being killed. So this whole dramatic need to kill rhinos to get the horn at that big, at that price was just unbelievable. So now in last year, in 2015, we lost in the order of 1,400 rhinos nationally in the country. Now that's no way that's sustainable. If this rate of increase maintains, we will have no more free roaming rhino in Africa within the next 8 years. Now where does all this poaching come from? Our neighbor, if you look at this line, we have a line there, that is the international border between South Africa and Mozambique. And in this area in particular, there's a lot of very poor people. Bear in mind, Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world. So people in the rural areas live a very, very low standard of living. And many of them come from these areas and cross into Kruger Park, and they get recruited to poach. That does not make them necessarily criminals. They are just people that if somebody comes along and offers them a gun and $1,000 and a machete and say, well, if you can get into Kruger, kill a rhino, bring us the horn, we'll give you an additional $1,000. That is money that this person is not going to see in 5 years' time in terms of income. So he's an opportunist and not necessarily a criminal. The criminals are in the line that feeds them back to the Asian countries. There's also been a study done by a group from the UCLA Berkeley Haas Business School to also look at this problem and to come up with some solution. And there were some interesting things that they had to say about this after a good investigation. And they came to the conclusion that the trade bans are failing. To have a ban on the trade, you only play in the hands of the criminals that will continue to do this killing up to obtain the horns, because there's no other way to get them. Secondly, the criminal organizations are taking over the market, and they are imposing high costs of violence and corruption in weak societies. It has been pointed out by the US CIA that even Al-Qaeda is getting in the revenue from this source. And these poachers are also getting more sophisticated. They are also using modern methods to find rhino and to make their getaways if there's any law enforcement groups in the area. In Kruger Park, that's happening at quite a bit. So Kruger Park is beginning to see a leveling off of the intensity of poaching, but more poachers are going around Kruger Park and into the rest of the country, and particularly trying to poach and kill rhinos on private land. So the trade bans, that's the issue. We believe that we should get this changed around so that South Africa and particularly the rhino owners can have a regulated and a restricted trade. We're not saying that you should throw it open and everybody can just start selling rhino. That'll be wrong. We say only people that can prove that they are the owners or managers of land on which rhino are, then they must prove that the DNA of the rhino horn matches the DNA of the animal. And with that, then they can put that particular horn on an auction for restricted and regulated selling to a buyer, which might be in China or in Vietnam. And that after the horn has been sold, you must be able to also go back and point out that the animal from which it was obtained is still a live rhino. Well, no game rancher or rhino rancher is going to kill the animal to get the horn. So anybody else that cannot comply to these conditions will not be able to participate in any trade. And if such a person would pitch at a rhino sale, will be arrested because then they have obtained the horn on an illegal basis. Now bear in mind that horn, as I think I mentioned that earlier, that this horn grows at a rate of about 1.5 kilogram per annum. So the same animal next year can be darted, immobilized, and the horn can be cut off. As you can see what's happening there, I'm cutting that horn, and with a handsaw, and I can assure you that's a very, very hard substance to do with a hand. It's much better to use a chainsaw. Some people are taking their horns off now just in order to, and that it should act as a deterrent, but it isn't really a deterrent because several rhino which had their horns already sewn off have been poached, and then they just hack with a machete everything else that is still left off. So it's not exactly a big deterrent. But there's been quite a few question marks on the cutting of the horn. Well, one must remember that the female rhinos, on average, have got a slightly bigger horn than the males, and they use, in free nature, they use the horn to protect their young ones against predators like lions. But on the reserves, the private reserves, where there are no predators, so that function is therefore neutralized. They don't have to protect their young ones against predators, so they don't really need the horn. The males, on the other hand, do fighting with each other for dominance, like males do. And if you now cut the horn off and you just got the shorter stump, the chances of injury or even death in fights, male fights, is almost eliminated. So it's actually a good thing to have the horn off. The animal functions and performs otherwise normally. We cannot continue with failed strategies. We must start thinking out of the box. We think that CITES should allow us to handle this issue of trade and regulation, because it is particularly the private reserve owners that we're concerned about, because they just simply cannot afford to have a young army protecting their rhinos. And with an income, and if they can get a couple of $100,000 on each rhino, that will make the money to be able to afford proper protection of their animals and make a profit on the sideline. And with that, more and more other game ranchers would want to also then get into the rhino ranching thing. And hopefully then we'll start seeing a growth in the number of rhinos in the country and not a decline as we are seeing at this point in time. On the technological side, there's been several interventions trying to protect them. I've personally put some trackers, GPS trackers, on these animals so that at least the landowner or the rhino owner can see on his GPS screen, his monitor, where his animals are wandering on his ranch, and if they're close to vulnerable areas, he can do something about it. Trap cameras are being used. Wi-Fi mesh screening is very expensive to install, is being done, but I think trap cameras and GPS trackers got lots of potential. And then the use of drones. The latter one, I believe, is quite an important one. And there's been a very interesting news clip a few weeks ago on the successful use of drones in the protection of rhinos.
They're among the world's most endangered species. Rhinos are being killed by poachers in Africa at an alarming rate. The black rhino in particular is facing the highest risk of extinction. But now a team of scientists here in the U.S. is exploring a new way to stop poachers in their tracks from the air. Our Chief Environmental Affairs correspondent, Ann Thompson, has our report.
Weighing up to 8,000 pounds, the powerful rhinoceros can trace its lineage back 55 million years. But preserving the rhino's future may depend on 21st century technology. Drones, those unmanned aircraft.
Can I pick this up?
You can pick this up.
Oh my gosh, it's so light.
Are what Dr. Thomas Snitch and a team at the University of Maryland think will protect rhinos from deadly poachers in southern Africa.
In the past 6 months where we've been operating in Africa, we've arrested a lot of poachers. There's not been one single gunshot.
Africa is a vast continent. Poachers use its size and the cover of night to their advantage. But in this test program, drones like this, armed with infrared cameras, act as shepherds in the sky to spot poachers.
How do you decide where to fly the drones?
I don't decide, the computer decides.
And that's the key. Their innovative technology crunches data about where the rhinos eat, drink, and mate to predict with precision where the poachers will strike.
Every rhino that was taken in this area was killed within 160 meters of this road.
The drones are launched from a mobile command center. They send back live video, which is used to deploy rangers to intercept the poachers. The stakes couldn't be higher.
We're in the middle of a poaching crisis, and it is a crisis.
The World Wildlife Fund says in 2007, 62 rhinos were killed in Africa. Last year, the number jumped to nearly 1,300, fueled by an insatiable demand in East Asia for rhino horns, rumored to cure everything from cancer to a hangover. One horn can go for as much as $250,000 on the black market.
This is a global problem, and it needs global solutions.
Now, a group called Air Shepherd is partnering with Dr. Snitch to raise money so African game reserves and parks can use this technology to help one of nature's oldest and most fascinating creatures survive for millions of years to come. Ann Thompson, NBC News, College Park, Maryland.
So, to sum it up then, we are supposed to protect the species, and we just are not successful in it. There was also an interview on CNN, which I did myself, about the use of drones, and you can see the link up there. I think that whilst we do not have the luxury of trade and income to protect them, at least what we can do is use drones and whatever other methods possible to protect the species. And there's also some humor. Some guys develop a sticker of this nature, which I think also brings across the sentiments. What I meant with this picture is really what I got from a friend of mine, is that the shooting of poachers is not something that I condone. We've seen a lot of the poachers being killed, and nowadays the policy is at least not to shoot the poacher unless he refuses to throw down his arm or lifts a rifle or a firearm to want to shoot a ranger. Then they do get shot. But to just shoot them outright is wrong. You often shoot folks that are not criminals. You leave families without a father. That's just a guy that's just opportunistic to get an income, and therefore went that route under pressure. So I believe that one should rather follow a different route. And also, our military is not exactly successful in it. And one of my students said we should try and camouflage rhinos. No, I don't think that's going to work very well either. But this is going to be it. There you see a picture of rhinos. You can slice the horn off not lower than you can see there, because you don't want to get near the veins and the arteries. It's just like a fingernail. You don't want to cut it close to the flesh and then just let it grow. But the point that we want to do is, if we can't move them to safety like you see there, we need to do something else. There you see another picture of ones being moved in an area without roads to a safer place. And what we believe should happen is that we can take, and this action is still happening this year, a small group of rhinos is being taken to Texas, where they can act as rhinos in like a safe deposit box. We can't predict what's going to happen to the rhinos in South Africa. If we cannot stem this increase in poaching, we're going to lose them in the wild. So at least let's have some in a place where they can be more safe. And we've had a group of Texas ranchers out in South Africa that were very interested in it, and some arrangements have been made between private owners in South Africa and private owners in Texas to house some rhinos on their ranches. Before I continue on the plight of the northern white rhino, I wanted to return for a moment and say the following about Mozambique. I believe that where most of the poachers of the rhinos now come from Mozambique, we should go out there and create a game ranch in their midst. Have it fenced so that there's proper protection, stock it with wildlife, all sorts of species, but also include a good number of white rhinos. And then train the people to protect these animals and to do patrol of the fences. But allow them then to be able on an annual basis under custodianship to harvest horn and get this legally sold on a regulated basis. This will create a bigger income than these guys would get presently from the criminals that pay them to go and kill rhinos to get the horn. And if we can achieve this, local people, the local poor people, will be able to get a sustainable and formidable income that will change their lives and will increase their standard of living and will also lead to the long-term protection of the species. So we must empower poor people to be able to ranch with rhino to their financial benefit and the benefit of the rhinos. And that the southern white rhinos don't happen or don't go the path of the northern white rhino. The northern white rhino you see in this list of different species, well, there's very little left of all of them. The only one that's still thriving in reasonable big numbers are the southern white rhinos. The northern white rhino, there's only 3 individuals left. And these 3 are in a small camp, highly protected around the clock in northern Kenya at a reserve called Olpoyeta. These rhinos do not breed, therefore they're going to die. Therefore, the northern white rhino subspecies will go extinct. However, we are now trying, with the help of a colleague of mine, Dr. Mornay Delaray in South Africa, to obtain sperm and to obtain oocytes out of those northern white rhinos, and then to freeze these and develop the technique that they're working on is to do in vitro fertilization and then place the embryos on a 64-cell stage into female southern white rhinos in the hope that they will then give birth to the pure northern white rhino subspecies. So breeding is the way to go in southern Africa, and here you see the device that has been developed to collect the oocytes out of the rhinos, and there you see it in practice being done. And it is not a difficult task. You must just know your way around and have the right equipment. And I see this as probably the only way that we could possibly save the northern white rhino. There's definitely no others. At some point that we were thinking that there might still be some of them in South Sudan, but the vicious civil war there, I'm very doubtful if there's any some northern white rhinos still left in that country. Those up in Olpoyeta, well, we've just had some of these, 2 of the veterinarians that work up there, trained to collect semen and oocytes. And this can be done up to 12 hours after the animal's death. So they must be ready to be able to collect this valuable cells in order to try and save the species. And there you see the 2 Kenyans in the middle during the practice sessions back in South Africa. And there's a practice session of collecting oocytes from a sable antler. In addition to what we mentioned about the Mozambique, I believe that in Congo, and I've been talking to representatives in the Congo, there are areas that has all the wildlife has disappeared, and people are desperately poor in these areas. This is on the southern part of the Congo, the Katanga. There's also extremely poor communities, and we believe that these people, same as Mozambique, should be empowered by having wildlife that they can sustainably use, and particularly rhinos, where they can legally harvest horn and have a restricted trade on it, which would cause the standard of living of these people to drastically increase. Thank you.